Hello, I just have a couple of quick announcements. The first is that if you're using the CCM events Wi-Fi network, please stop doing that because that's what we're using to live stream the event. You can use CCM guest. The password is CCM sharing. I said CCM a lot of times. The other is not to sit on the stairs. Obviously, you're all in seats now, but if you see people coming in sitting on the stairs, please ask them to come in. We'll be running up and down the stairs, and we don't want to have to trip over you. So now for our speaker. He is an iOS dev at Artsy. He is the design dictator of CocoaPods. And he's the...
Woo! Oh, I'm on now. Thanks,
he
man.
is the Lady Gaga of the open source Swift community.
Oh, yeah.
Orta Therox.
Thank you. We'd actually been having this debate earlier because the tagline for CocoaPods currently is like the dependency manager for Objective-C and like community, something along those lines. And how do we bridge that? I'm still not decided on that one. Yeah, file. Yeah, there must be an issue somewhere about this. I think it'll be on CocoaPods.org. You're welcome to like join the discussion, and eventually I'll just say no, it's this way. Right. So I work for a company called Artsy, and I'm normally known for my CocoaPods work. But right now I figured it was time to start talking about things other than CocoaPods because we just already did a big event yesterday where we announced absolutely nothing. Totally true. There's been nothing new to show at our State of the Union. But I wanted to start talking about a time period that was kind of interesting to me. That was this period last year. And it was at the start of WWDC till the iOS 7 launch. So this here is my public GitHub commits. So these are things when I'm working on open source, or most likely when I'm working on CocoaPods. You can see there's this big disparity at this time period where suddenly I did nothing. None of the sites got updated. None of the actual websites got anything. And so what I was doing was I was working on iOS 7 app. And to describe Artsy, I still haven't got like a single one-liner to do it yet, but the closest that we have is it's Pandora for art. And it's this idea of the Art Genome Project, which is a multi-dimensional array of different tags or categories that we apply to artworks individually. What this means is that we have a network of, I think, tens of thousands of artworks that are all intrinsically linked together so that when you start going onto one artwork, we can recommend you other artworks based on that. It's a pretty simple idea, but it's beautiful. It means that you can build on really interesting tools on top of this. And the current main interface for most people is the website. It's this really big, complex, interesting website with rich, extremely rich pages that are full of images and text and different layouts, and it's all very unique throughout the entire app. And we'd been working previously on an app that was an art gallery app for showing off the artworks internally. And it was coming to be about time that we wanted to think, maybe it's time to start thinking, how do we apply this website onto an iOS device? Because it was one of those questions that was asked regularly, like, you have a big website, but I can't find you in the App Store. How do we fix this? And so previous to WWDC, we started playing with a few different ideas on how you can transform this website down into this small device. And we're quite lucky because we have this amazing product designer. His name is Robert Lenne, and if you're ever interested in getting into design itself, he has this recommendation website that is a collection of links that is more or less enough to get you started to actually do some really solid design. These are like the sort of things that I play with when I'm trying to understand how to like brand and expand CocoaPods' influence in the community. And in preparing for this talk, I got the chance to sit down with him and actually interview with him about what he thought the core tenets of the iOS app were. And so he summed it up in 4 pretty simple ideas. And the first one was, I know what I'm looking for. So when you've got a phone, you may already know the information that you're about to look up So you may be thinking, like, you're talking with someone about an artist, for an example. So we spent a lot of time actually thinking about what is a quick way to get access to search from the home screen. And what is the right way to actually present it from there? How do you deal with different types of searches? And also, for us, how did we allow people to find things that we, on the native side, still hadn't actually built yet? So search was really a core aspect of it. And then there was the idea of browsing. Like, you come in, you've got like 10 minutes maybe, you're interested in the art world, you don't know what's really going on right now, but you want to focus on something. So in this case, we have these big headers, and these are like a great way to kind of browse and explore inside an application. And they're not deep. They're usually maybe 2 or 3 levels of navigation in until you start then seeing only artworks that we start recommending you based on that. But it's a really good way of actually jumping in. You think you've only got a few minutes, you might go on Instagram to scroll through your feed, or you could go and look at a few interesting artworks. Then there was the idea that I know what I'm trying to talk about, but I don't really know how to describe it. This was, for us, this idea that you would want to maybe look at an overview of this kind of content, in our case artworks, as a way of browsing larger categories. So we have this browse mode that allows you to see all these different types of actual categories of artworks. And we regularly change the ones on the top, and we try and feature different ones so that people can always keep going back to this. And whilst it's not quite the serendipity of the front page, which is always about what's new and fresh, this is like a nice way of saying, well, I like this front picture, so maybe I like the rest of these types of artworks. And finally, we had one of the key tenets to me about mobile is that it's with you at all times. And push notifications are really one of the core ideas around this. And I still personally feel like we're not entirely still utilizing it. It was really nice to see some of the stuff with iOS 8 where we'll be able to do custom notifications. So like in my case, it would be brilliant to start sending like beautiful images as like artworks that you're interested in based on artworks that you've already liked. And so we spent quite a bit of time on push notifications so that we could tell people that there's a new fair, or we could tell people that an artist that they've already had interest in has actually got new works on the website. And at the moment, like, we try and think this is very similar to the process of how we deal with emails on the website. So I want to talk a little bit about the actual process that we did in actually getting the app out. We had quite a small time frame to do that because we had the announcement of iOS 7. We'd only spent maybe a month or 2 beforehand in thinking about what the actual app was going to be and how it was going to fit. But then when iOS 7 came out and the designing and the brand was just fit so beautifully with our internal design, meant that it really was something that we felt it was worth actually pushing towards and taking the sacrifice on things like code quality and maintainability in order to actually get out an app in time for the iOS 7 launch. And one of the ways that we did this was by doing regular betas and having an external QA team that was running our apps to make sure that they weren't crashing and they weren't, that they did exactly what they expected. These guys were really useful in that they would test a lot of the things that we, the development team, would think were not our responsibility. And they would assign issues to us stating that actually, do you know what, this is your responsibility. And sometimes that kind of feedback kicks us into either making someone else fix something or actually having a very concrete example of where the problem lies. So I've been really happy with QA. We ended up talking with Apple a little bit in anticipation of the iOS 7 launch because we told them that we had an iOS app coming out and we were thinking of doing it for iOS 7. And we actually got some feedback from them. It worked out really well in our case because it made us, it got us featured on the design for iOS 7. This is at least in the UK App Store. And this worked out really well. From what I gather, it's really quite useful to actually just send emails to Apple anyway. If you are having issues with things like accessibility, they actually have accessibility labs that they'll test your apps on, for an example. That is something that I'd never even thought that Apple would provide as a service, but it is a possibility, but it's not a possibility if you don't try and contact them. So I'd recommend doing that. So we crunched for 3 months, and in order to do that, we had to build a few interesting abstractions. We had to do a few, we had to create some tools, and I'd like to show you a little bit about what we ended up making in this process. So one of the things that we did was we made a hybrid application. We spent a large amount of time working on how do you make a web view act exactly like the rest of the application. I don't know the stats, but roughly, I'd say more than 50% of the app at the time was actually web views that we had been doing custom view controllers, and they would still they wouldn't do like back and forwards in the web view. It would pretend that it was a full navigational view pushed when they'd switch between them. They'd have the same navigational systems. They'd have all the same like designs and styles, but it meant that we never actually had to build every single part of the app. Luckily for us at the same time, there was a lot of discussion about maybe building a separate mobile web version of our website. So both the mobile web version of the website and the native version of the website were being built at the same time, which made it easy to share design. And it also made it easy for us to kind of zigzag, where the mobile web team might build something before we do, and we only had to support it via an in-app router. And eventually we might get around to it, but at that point, as long as it worked on mobile web, then we could only continue to do things that were like hard, or things that needed to be native, really. It gave us a chance to actually think, this aspect is something that people will use a lot, that we consider to be the core tenets of the experience on the app. So doing it as a hybrid app really worked out well for us, in my opinion. We played with the idea that a lot of the time we should be using view controllers whenever you are thinking of building a view. So in this case here, we have an artwork view controller, which is basically just a collection view with separate different layouts. So it meant that we would always have the same consistency in terms of app routing or presenting these actual artworks, but they would just have different layouts and they would all be in different places, but they would always still act the same, and it meant that we could share a large amount of code there. And it worked out really well for us. I'm really quite pumped with how that one ended up, because it was we had quite a long debate about whether to do view controllers or views everywhere. We were huge users of Reveal. Our entire app now is built in auto layout, and so the new Reveal beta makes me super excited. But also the Xcode 6 stuff. The idea that now that they've got a lot of the view navigation that you can see at runtime in there means that you can actually introspect on some of the harder parts of your view hierarchy and kind of understand the problems almost before you even got to them. It saved me countless hours. We found that we hit a real breakpoint towards the end because we had our own authentication system in our actual website. So we just, as developers, just kept logging in using our email addresses and our passwords. I found that this meant that we ended up with this really squashed time at the end trying to make sure that Twitter worked and Facebook worked with all the odd edge cases that you get. Like you've registered with a Facebook account, but you've clicked log in another time, and suddenly the system just didn't understand exactly where you're coming in from. This is kind of hairy code that we still haven't really touched since then because it just feels like it's a little bit brittle. But we also came and dealt with this later as well by applying tests to it. We are huge users of CocoaPods, unsurprisingly. Pretty sure, that's 80 lines in our pod file here of all the different pods that we've used in there. A lot of the time we'll fork it. As of now, we've been forking other people's, adding tests, submitting it back, and then using that in their pod files. But it's all been really nice to kind of experiment with other people's code, pulling it in, and being like a very good custodian of the community. If they were all disparate projects, it would be nice, but it'd be very hard to make contributions back. And a lot of the time when we thought about building our own libraries, it's always made sense to either look to see if someone else has done it and make pull requests to make them changed and actually make improvements to everybody's libraries. So we've done that a few times. We did it quite recently with a map view. We rewrote someone's map view almost entirely from scratch, added fresh tests and all sorts of things. Next up, we did in-app routing. That was a really cool idea. Again, when you're mapping a website to an app, then suddenly you really want the URLs to correspond. So if we get a set URL from a website, then we treat it differently to if we get a set URL from internally inside the app, because sometimes you'll have more information than just an ID. This one's kind of cool. So this is one of the highlight features of the app for a lot of people. So rather than try to explain it, I'll show it. And it's like the viewing room of an artwork. We have the ability to see it like that, but when you twist it, it pushes in and it does parallax, and it's like a completely different perspective on what the artwork is. Now, these things are kind of interesting. First off, because that transition is a navigation push and pop. That's using the new iOS 7 API. But we spent a lot of time, as was building like debug versions of it. So this is the mode where you can start to see like what's the eye-line level, what should the minimum version of the floor be. We had a version that also would allow you to make quick changes between like the parallax distances for when you're actually rotating it. It's like the idea of Steve Jobs' calculator toolbox. We added settings. I'm sure anybody that's seen the Flipboard talks will have seen this. It's like a really easy way to make changes. We allow offline mode, a lot of cool stuff in there. The debug menus meant that we could actually make edits to things in real time. And it was quite a simple API, and it's just really useful for us. So the stuff that we did afterwards was to try and clean up the code and try and like add a bit of developer flair to it. So one of the cool tools in here now is that you can actually convert everything at runtime into ASCII. It's been a brilliant Easter egg that we've had in the app now for like maybe 3 or 4 months. You can just do the up, up, down, down, left, right, BA gesture on the front page, and it will switch to this, and everything from that point on will be ASCII-fied. We started making an abstraction called OR stack view. We'd been playing with this idea already, which is like, how do we just stack views on top of each other? And it turned out we'd maybe implemented 2 or 3 different versions of this, but eventually stumbled upon this kind of idea that you should only really think about just throwing in views, and it should order itself if you know exactly that it's going to be a stack. Now, that's cool, but then when you start thinking about it a bit further, it's even cooler that it can organize its own ordering. So OR stack view it can be an order agnostic version of an insertion order agnostic stack. What this means is that you can have multiple API calls and you can return back your views at different times, but they'll still get put into the same order. So it's you, as the developer, don't have to keep track of actually where it should go in the system. You only have to provide a view tag and it will order it itself. We use this everywhere. So for example, this is like a rough version of what the iPad app looks like. And it starts off with the entire thing is a stack view. Inside that, then, is a stack view here on the left, stack view on the right. This is like a split stack view where it always makes sure that whatever the bottom one is, they're both at the same height. Inside that is another stack view in there giving artwork metadata, because there could be very different metadata in there too. And then even at the bottom, the about this artwork was a stack view when we made this. It provided a really solid abstraction layer for us to start thinking about how we want to order our views, and it made it quite functional in the end. When I started looking at reactive Cocoa code, it ended up being very similar to what we were doing, which was like you have a artwork did load, and then suddenly you start throwing in views at runtime, and you never have to keep so much state in there unless you're wanting to do like animations. So I was really happy with where that ended up. We started experimenting. We started taking testing extremely seriously in Artsy after we got the app out. I did this by sitting and reading this entire book called Working Effectively with Legacy Code, which is this idea that if there's not tests, it's a legacy code. And therefore, you should spend your time trying to figure out what's the best way to get the most test coverage with almost the least amount of tests, so then you can actually then start making changes and feeling like you know whether something's changed. That just leads quite naturally onto doing continuous integration. Apple have just released Bots 2, which means it'll now work with CocoaPods, which is very cool. So now I might start looking at using this as well because the reporting tools look really solid. But for now, Travis CI has been a really great example of ways of like doing testing. If you're doing open source, you should probably be using Travis CI. At this point, CocoaDocs, the website for documenting everybody's pod specs, will automatically tell everybody whether you're doing Travis CI or not. So it's like there's like an implicit push towards that from the CocoaPods tooling, and that's only going to get worse or better depending on your perspective. So we use these pods, Spectre and Expector, been really happy with that. OCMock's been really good too. Really excited to see where that's actually going with version 3. OHTTP stubs is really awesome as well. And then the rest is kind of like the ways in which we deal with snapshotting views, which I think is next. Yes. So a lot of people always say, well, we can't test views, so we just don't bother testing at all. And luckily, we had someone who came in and didn't believe in that and found this thing called FB Snapshot View. An FB Snapshot View, FB Snapshot test case is really cool because once you start using it and once you start getting this kind of collection of tests behind you, you can start actually building with only running your tests and seeing what the tests look like. So this is tests that one of the guys at Artsy did that is to check different states when you've got no like artwork follows or no artist follows, or I think it also includes if you're offline. No. But it means that at a glance you can get a glimpse of what every single view looks like at once. And you know that now that we have these screenshots in that if something changes there, then we know exactly that that has changed. And it's a very good overview case here. We have like more fine-grained versions for specific views around the app, but a lot of the time, a single ViewController one like this is enough to give you an overview that if you make a UI color change somewhere, you now know that it's changed all the way over here because that test has failed. Snapshots worked out really well, in my opinion. And again, someone, not me luckily, went and did all of the actual testing around our user authentication stuff. Like, this is the kind of thing that when you're actually building it for the first time, you feel really guilty because you haven't wrote tests on it. But when you go back to make tests on it, you actually have probably understand the problem a little bit better. But at the same time, it's like it felt like core code to us that needed to be solidly tested and ran every time that the app was done. It's a similar thing that if you use core data, doing core data migrations. In the other app to this, we have a version, one of our tests runs every single version of the core data database through the migration process involved in like when you put it with a core data model set or whatever, which means that I know very well that someone that had version 1.3 can update to the latest version of the App Store without any crashes. And that to me has been like really freeing in how I can make changes to the core data model without actually having to worry that someone has got a really old version that they're going to update. So yeah, applying testing has worked out pretty well for us right now. We're still trying to figure out like the right patterns there internally at Artsy. I think everybody is still trying to find the right patterns for the open source world, but I still believe that if you're doing views, FB Snapshot test case is probably the best way to make sure that what you expect is what you get. And it's very easy to add because all you have to do is create the view and then just do expect it to be like this. And a lot of that's automated. And if you're interested in that and using Spectre, we have a pod that makes it very easy to do the syntax with. So that's me. I'm free to take questions because I timed it just right. So thank you, everybody. Questions? Oh, we got a mic.
Who did you contact at Apple for the accessibility lab and your design feedback?
Whoa, do you want names?
Oh no, well, like if it's like just a point of, you don't have to give me names.
In this case, I think it was. There's a thing in the iTunes Connect that you can contact them through. It's like the same. They keep trying to feature one of our other apps, which is only for art galleries. And so I always have to keep going through the same iTunes Connect thing saying, like, please don't feature this app. It's not featurable. Normal people can't use it. You can do the same thing in there. There's like a ton of different questions that you can ask. There's like the automated ones. And you can also do one that's not automated. And you get the feedback from that. Same thing for accessibility. Yeah. Oh, yeah, there's also the Alt Accessibility Labs, which is actually, Sally's running that. Yeah, so there's an Accessibility Labs now, if you're actually interested in this, from the woman who told me a lot about these details. So you can also talk to her if you get the chance over there, which I would definitely recommend. She was really cool at that.
I was just wondering.
Can't even tell.
Sorry, I'm
looking.
right here.
Yeah.
I was just wondering when you mentioned the core data migration test you guys had. That was really interesting to me. I was wondering if that's something you guys wrote out yourselves, or you used some kind of CocoaPod library to do that.
It's only maybe about 10 lines of code to run through them all. Okay. I just included all the actual. Well, the key point there is you have to have an old version of the core data database.
Right.
So I built a tool called Chairs, which allows you to store older versions of your like entire documents folder, well, your entire apps folder with like preferences and stuff. So for me, I already had these old versions, so I just dragged out the core data database and put them into my app, or the test target anyway. Right. So yeah, you can just do it. It's not hard. I'll write a blog post about it.
That'd be nice.
Yeah.
Did you ever look into doing sort of integration level testing with like Calabash or KIF?
Well, I'd spent some time with KIF with an older project and ended up taking it out. I know there's a lot of people that do that because I believe that level of testing is one of those great kind of overall things, and the idea that testing the largest surface area would work quite well with that. But I found them to be brittle when I worked with KIF 2-ish years ago. And I don't think it's had that many updates since. If you I know a team that has one person full time working on the KIF, on their KIF tests, which separates like the people that make it and the people that actually generate those tests. They're good. So maybe things have changed, and it might be worth trying again. It's worth trying again. Yeah, KIF looks cool. I'm into that. Any others? I reckon I can make one more if it's a quickie. How big is your team? 4. We were 2 when we built this app. Yeah. Well, I mean, we churned pretty hard on it, but it turned out pretty well. We just all kind of died at the end of it, and I went off to India for a month, and it's like, screw doing programming. Process. But yeah, cool.
What were your biggest hurdles doing the web views?
Click handling. Like making sure that we could register whether we wanted to handle that URL or internally, because there's like multiple ways at which a URL could be ran internally. So there is a native component, which is entirely native. There's like internal, like fake version of Artsy through this, which has different mechanics. So like the scroll speed is different, and the way that we intercept taps is different to how we would do it if it was like an in-browser experience. And then a lot of the things that we had problems there was like dealing with staging and production environments and make like HTTPS versus HTTP. So we have a lot of well-tested code around the router internally about like, if I send this URL in from a tap, what do I get out at the end? That was our biggest thing there, I think. Cool? Cool. Well, thank you again. I'll be at the Alt Labs. Oh, there's a CocoaPods Alt Lab too. You could see that. I don't know when it is. I'm pretty casual, me.
All right, we'll just take a couple-minute break, and then we'll have the next speaker.